Today on Safest Family on the Block, we're speaking with Don Armstrong about habits of awareness. Thank you for joining us today. If you like what you see, please do hit the subscribe button and the like button. It helps more than you know. If you love this, please tell a friend, find us on Facebook, or back our efforts on Patreon. Thank you again. Now let's get after it. Hello again, everybody. Welcome to Safest Family on the Block, where knowledge is power. I'm your host, Jason, and with me today is Don Armstrong of Thinksafe Seminars. Hello, Don.
Hi.
Don is with us today, and in late 2016, after reading about a spate of vicious attacks, she realized that a lack of situational awareness was contributing to people getting hurt and even killed. This is a theme you may have heard on other episodes of this particular channel, the importance of awareness. She combined her expertise in martial arts and marketing and creativity and founded Thinksafe Seminars. And as a third-degree black belt, she began her martial arts journey while studying at Syracuse University, and in her career has helped businesses and nonprofits grow via marketing and business development. And that's taught her how to relate to a wide variety of people, and that's what she brings to the table with her Thinksafe Seminars. Don, before we get into the real meat of this, could you tell us a little bit about what is a Thinksafe seminar?
Sure. A Thinksafe seminar is training that will help people learn new situational awareness skills. There are specific strategies, techniques that can be used to help people expand their awareness. I also train in improving conflict management, using non-escalation, de-escalation, crisis intervention skills and techniques. So all of this is to help people identify and avoid situations or deal more constructively with them.
Yeah.
But in the event that they can't avoid the violence or get out of it, then I also teach basic stun and run physical defense.
Excellent. That's exactly what a lot of our viewers need. You know, as parents, especially as a aging jock male parent, that crossing that line from kind of hoping to get into a fight to realizing I'm a parent and I had to turn in my idiot card and surrender it forever. And getting those skills to see a problem coming and then getting away from it rather than walking right up to it because that's what you're supposed to do. Thump, 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 thump. That's an important set of skills to learn, whether you're a mom or a dad. And so you kindly sent me a great outline about situational awareness, about creating habits of awareness. And at the beginning, let's talk a little bit about what is situational awareness. We've talked about it a bit in the program before, but mostly from the context of police officers and military who are aware for a living. Whereas you talk to people whose lives are fortunately not one where if you slip up in your awareness, you might die that day. What kind of awareness can a civilian build realistically?
They can build a lot of awareness, and even using some of the skills that people who are in the military, people who are in security jobs learn. All of those people learn how to analyze their environment, how to respond in different kinds of situations. And those are skills everybody can learn. So my training helps people learn how to do that. And I use habits that most people already have. And I build on those. So for instance, everybody has learned at some point to look both ways before they step off a curb, right? That's probably one, after learning how to not touch a hot stove, that's probably one of the earliest preventive safety things that people learn. So adding on to that, you look left, you look right, and scan. Just adding that scan, that last step, not only helps them not get hit by a car, but they can also see what else is going on around them. If anything looks unusual, if a person makes them look twice, then they can see a situation and avoid it. They can go back into the store or the building they just came out of. There are a lot of different options. And most of what I train is about options, just letting people know that they have options.
That's a really great insight about how, like I was saying, police and military, they build a habit of awareness through their career, where what you're saying is that we all have habits of awareness. It's just a matter of maybe bulking them up a little bit or remembering to practice them more frequently. These are muscles we've already built. We just have to apply them. So that's a really valuable insight. And you mentioned here about ways that we could actually not only build up these skills in ourselves, these habits in ourselves, but also teach them to our children and have our kids learn those early and apply them to their own safety. Could you talk a bit about that?
Sure. With our kids, it depends on their age, right? But even at a young age, you can teach children how to be more aware. You just have to provide the ideas and make it fun, right? Make it into a game, because we're not really trying to scare them as much as train them to avoid problems. And kids don't usually want to get into a fight. They want to avoid things just as much as we do. So you can, using the curb idea again, when you're walking out, you say, okay, I'm going to give you 5 seconds. Tell me what you see.
Sure.
Well, what did they see? Did they see anything that looked odd? Was there any person doing something that maybe they shouldn't have been doing? So it teaches the children, even at a young age, to just notice more about what's going on. They all know when something doesn't look right. They all know when somebody is doing something they're not supposed to be doing. And a lot of them are more than happy to tell you about it. Especially
if the person doing the trouble is a little, yeah, especially if it's us or a younger sibling,
right,
or an older sibling. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And are there other games like that you can recommend to our viewers to play with our kids even today?
Sure. There's the old game hide and go seek, right? Mm-hmm. But you can use the idea of hiding places as a game, a safety training game, where you can say, okay, if you needed to hide right now, where could you go? Where could you hide right now? Okay, can you still see what's going on? Can you leave? What if you needed to run away? Could you still leave? And so you plant these seeds, these ideas, and then the kids start to look for those kinds of spaces where they could hide or get away and try to protect themselves.
That's really interesting. That reminds me of a game that I've hung out in some groups that play this game, and a lot more hardcore people play that a lot, where you'll be sitting in a restaurant or a bar and your buddy will cover your eyes and ask you where the exits are. And if you can't answer, you're buying the next round. And that same kind of thing about being aware of where would you go right now if there was trouble.
Right. And you can do the same things in stores or restaurants with the kids. You say, okay, if there were an emergency and that door was blocked, how could you get out of here? And it teaches them to look for exit signs. It teaches them to recognize where there's other doors or windows, stairways, even escalators, depending on where you are. I've always told my kids, if something happens in a restaurant and you can't go out the front door, look for the kitchen.
Because there's always a door out of the kitchen.
There is. That's where they bring in the food and they take out the trash. There's always a door.
And I could see taking that same concept, it not only teaches them where they can hide in an emergency, but I'm sure would also build their alertness for blind corners and areas that a potential attacker could be hiding in wait. That's less likely to be a problem for children, but it's a good skill to have as we get to be adults and get to be teenagers and spend more time walking in environments where there might be somebody hiding around a corner. So that's
Absolutely
really interesting. I also noticed a good one you put here just about if this were a video game, where would the threat be? Could you tell me about that? I like it.
Well, that's for maybe tweens or teens who are playing some of the different kinds of video games out there, because on a lot of those games, that's what they're doing. They're looking for threats. They're identifying who's coming at them, who might be helping them. They're identifying ways to avoid them, to hide from them, to attack them. You know, so if you bring that gamification out into the real world, say, okay, if this were your game, where would the threat be? Where could they be? What would they be doing?
So not just gamifying the activity, but also drawing in the knowledge they have from games.
Right.
And if your kids play as much video games as my kids want to, they're probably better at that than we are in a lot of ways.
It's surprising what they see.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't play a lot of video games, but my son was able to point out some things that I hadn't seen either. So that it was good.
Wonderful. Now you bring up also a point that's it's a through line with most self-defense guides, and it's so important about teaching your kids to trust their instincts and to listen to those instincts, even if they're having social pressure or pressure from adults or friends to ignore them.
Yeah, trusting your instincts is a really big one, and it can be really hard to do because we're trained, even as children, we're trained to be polite, to be nice, to say, oh, well, I know that person, nothing bad, they're not a bad person, right? And yet you're still getting that prickly feeling on the back of your neck, or, you know, and kids, a lot of times they'll get stomach aches, or they're scared and they can't explain why. There's a lot of different signs that a child is feeling something is not right. So helping them understand that that's their instinct and letting them know that their instinct is there to protect them is really important, because once they identify with that, then they'll know that it's okay to do something. And I tell a lot of people, even adults, I say, if you are scared, use that fear. Use your fear and turn it into an action. If you're sitting down, stand up. You know, take your hands out of your pockets and keep them above your waist. And people say, why keep your hands above your waist? Well, because if your hands are above your waist, they're available to be able to protect yourself, to create distance. And it's the same with kids.
That's a bit of a tangent, but I think it's hugely important what you just said about having that bias towards action. That if you feel uncomfortable, to move, to change your state, to do something, both because it helps you acknowledge and tune into whatever intuition is telling you to pay more attention. And also because once you begin moving, even in small ways, and having those small pieces of agency, it fights the freeze part of the fight, flight, freeze continuum and makes you more likely to be able to act, whether it's to fight or to run away, if it turns out that your intuition is right. So I think that's a hugely important piece. And I like that just taking your hands out of your pockets. Those small motions can matter. And I really appreciate that you brought that up.
They can matter. And the other thing is to have a few go-to responses for these types of situations. We all get into uncomfortable situations, sometimes those are dangerous. A lot of times they're just really uncomfortable. And you don't know if they're dangerous or not. But if you can respond to them in a more confident way and get out of there, then you'll be keeping yourself safe no matter what. So what do I mean by that? A go-to response could be something as easy as no, or stop, or I gotta go. A lot of times kids feel like they need an excuse. The excuses can be things like, oh, I have to ask my mom, or I gotta go to the bathroom. I forgot something, I have to go get something. Just giving them phrases, excuses, they're socially acceptable, but it helps them remove themselves from the situation.
That makes sense. And for teens, my teen son, when he was still a teenager, he's 20 now, we had a code where if he was in a situation that he wasn't comfortable with, he would text me asking if his Uncle Matt had gotten here yet. You know, Matt visits like twice a year, so he's probably not coming on that day, but that's my sign that, okay, he wants trouble. He wants me to call him on the phone and loudly say, dude, get your ass home because Uncle Matt's going to be here and he misses you. And so he has that out despite social pressure and social interactions. And it seems like this is a way to do that even with our younger kids. Give them like, I got to go to the bathroom, I'll be right back. And then, of course, you never come back. And so that's really good.
Or you go tell another adult. But I love the idea, especially for the teens, of having a code of some kind, or they can just text you the code or a sentence like that.
And it seems like this is the beginning of just creating scripts for yourself. Almost very much like you and I both study Kempo Karate, where we learn physical scripts, where if a hand comes in this way, our body knows a script to go like this. This seems like a verbal and emotional set of scripts to respond to dangerous situations. It's very interesting.
And it opens up a conversation with your kids. Like, what kind of situations have your friends encountered? Because it's easier for them to talk about their friends often than it is their own experiences. Although some
their friends'
experiences are their experiences.
Yeah.
But just opening up the conversation, letting them know that, you know, you're there to help them, talk them through it, maybe even give them some scenarios. Like say, you know, what if somebody comes up and is asking you for money? What could you say? I mean, that's a pretty easy one, but it might not be for a younger kid to know what to do.
Or even for adults, aggressive panhandling is a thing, and it's a thing for a reason.
It is.
Yeah. You also mentioned training directionally. What do you mean by that? And how is it important?
Training directionally is helping kids understand where they are and how to get from A to B. So if they're out somewhere and they get turned around, how do they figure out how to get back to where they need to be? Maybe they're in a store and they're shopping with you. You ask them to go get something. They go get it, but then they don't know where you are. How do they find their way back to you? What are some points that they can look for, such as a cashier or the front door, you know, to help them find their direction, find a place where they can get back to you, to a safe place. Or if it's in their own neighborhood. I think most people will have their kids memorize their address and the phone number, but showing the kids the address on a map is really helpful because kids are really good with pictures and they remember pictures. And so showing them where they live on a map and saying, okay, so here's our street and it connects to that street, and here's a store that we go to. It helps them visually connect dots so that if they were ever in a situation where they needed to find their way home, they not only know their address, they can know some of the streets around where they live and know how to get themselves back, or to tell somebody, where they live.
Okay. Oh, and I assume that you can also have some games and activities with your kids that can help them with these kinds of awareness skills as well.
You can, especially with the older ones.
Right.
My son actually was going to visit his grandparents in another state a few summers ago, and he was going to fly by himself.
Mm-hmm.
So a few months before that, the family was going on a trip. So we thought, okay, this is a good training opportunity. And we told him, when we get to the airport, we'll park the car, and you're going to get us from our car to our gate. So he knew he could think ahead of time about what he was going to need to do, but he knew that he was also going to have to do this for himself in a few months because he was flying by himself, and he was going to have to change planes. And so we let him do that. He took us from the car, we went inside, he looked around, he's like, oh, what airline are we taking? So we told him the airline. Okay, we have to go this way. And we get the tickets. I'm like, what do we do now? He's like, we have to go to the gate. Where's that? And then he had to figure out where that was and how to do that, how to get through security, how to find his gate. And the only time he had a problem was actually when we were switching planes. We got off the plane, we were in a strange airport. We started going toward the other gate. He figured out how to find what gate he needed. But then as we started going, he walked past a turnoff. So we just let him go. We just followed along until he got to a point, and we saw, like, where's that gate again? And he looked around, he's like, oh, it's back there. So we turned around and we went back, he found the turnoff, and we got to our gate. So it just forced him to think about things, to look for certain things, to think through the whole process of how to get from A to B and C and D and E, right? But he did great, and a few months later, when he was flying on his own, he did just fine.
That's so good. It is a rookie parent mistake that I'm hugely guilty of making, where because maybe we're in a hurry, maybe I'm just a bit more directional in my thinking, it would be very hard for me to let my kid wander past the turnoff and experience the consequence of that until he tripped to it. It would drive me insane. And I don't think I'm alone in that, but it's a great example of exactly how we can teach our kids these important skills in a very safe, low-stakes environment. I mean, I'm sure you knew at what point you were going to miss the flight and would have intervened if that danger arrived. So all he had to do is walk a few extra yards and be maybe a little embarrassed. That's a really great exercise. I think we can apply to a lot of situations with our kids.
Well, we all learn from mistakes. Or hopefully we learn from mistakes.
The question is, how quickly can we learn from other people's mistakes, or do we have to pee on the electric fence for ourselves? As I think that was George Wills who used to say that. Now, another really interesting thing that you bring up is, as all of us know, what's appropriate for younger kids is different from what's appropriate for older kids, both in terms of their emotional development and their physical size and strength, what they're able to remember, what they're able to conceive of. And you mentioned that there are things that younger kids can do, probably younger than we're imagining. Younger kids, elementary school kids, primary kids, what are some things we can do with them and teach them, some baselines that we can work with on them in terms of awareness and safety?
with younger kids, letting them know to trust their instinct and that it's okay to leave if they feel uncomfortable. Letting them know who they could go see if there's some kind of a situation that they're not comfortable with. And talking about that ahead of time. Who would they go see? Would they see a teacher or a parent or a sibling? Who could they go to for help if they are not liking a situation that they're in? If they're at school, teach them to not put things of value in outside pockets. Because if there's a backpack sitting around, some people get a little curious. They want to see what's in the pockets. Some things might disappear. So keeping things like money or anything of value to that child in a deeper pocket would be a good idea. I've talked to kids about the idea of drop and run, meaning if they're walking, they have their backpack, or they're riding their bike, and something happens, and they need to get away quickly, don't worry about your stuff. Because a lot of them are really concerned about their stuff, right, or their bike. And letting them know that, hey, stuff can be replaced, right? You can't be replaced. You're what's important. And if you have to get out of a situation, just drop your stuff, leave it there. Get out, get to a safe place. And by the way, a safe place is any place with other people and lights. That can be someone's home that they know if they're in a neighborhood. It can be a store. It can be inside the school, restaurants, any place with other people and lights. Because vast majority of people are going to help a kid who's in need, right? If a kid comes in and they're really upset and they're scared, most of the time people will be kind and they will help them, especially another parent. Now, I've often told my kids, if you get lost in here, find another parent and tell them you can't find me, and they will help you.
Yeah, if you can't find your parents, find someone else's parents.
Right.
No. Yeah, that's that training to look for and define safe spaces. When I was traveling in Southeast Asia with my 5-year-old, his instructions were, if there's trouble and you can't find me, run down the street in a straight line until you find a convenience store. Because in tourist areas, there's going to be one in 5 blocks, and then just get in there. Very specific, like you say, you gave very specific description of what a safe space means, and make a beeline. That's really smart, and what little guys can understand.
Right.
Another important part of what you said, I thought was about them going to adults to ask for help. Like you say, the overwhelming majority of adults are kind people who will help children. And so if your child approaches an adult, the odds are that they're going to encounter somebody who will help them, who will not mean them harm. Contrast to the adult that comes to them. Probably going to be nicer, much more likely to be a bad guy than the person the child selects.
That's true. And that brings up an idea that, again, with the instinct, not knowing quite what to do, one way that a kid will know if they need to leave a situation is if something happens that's different from what they were told is going to happen. So if you go to a convenience store, for instance, and you ask your tween to go inside and pick up some milk, They go inside the store and someone approaches them. I said, aren't you the one whose dad is waiting in the car? Yeah. Oh, well, he's going next door. He told me to bring you over there. Well, wait a minute. That's not what my dad said, right? He said he was going to wait in the car. So what are some options that tween can use, right? What are some options? They can get what they need, and they can go to the counter. They can tell the cashier, this guy's following me. Or, there's something weird here. Or they're at the counter and they call their dad. Hey, are you in the car? Are you next door? Can you come inside? Someone's bothering me. Right? Or they can just, it depends how confident of a kid they are. They could just say, hey, stop. Leave me alone. Right? I don't need your help.
Which will get the attention of the other adults in the store very rapidly.
Exactly. Because those stores are small. So people will see what's going on pretty quickly.
Now, you also talk about things that we can teach our teens because, of course, as they grow, they want to be more independent, and they're also able to take on more responsibility, understand more things, have more nuanced directions, make choices and decisions. So what are some of the things that we should teach our teens to do in terms of awareness and safety?
Teens often get in trouble because of their phones or their cars or both. They're always being told, pay attention, turn that off. But there are ways that they can learn to use their phones and use their cars to help keep themselves safe. So for instance, if they're on their phone and they're listening to music, usually they've got the earbuds in. Well, if you're walking by yourself, maybe only have one earbud in. Because I know you can tell them not to wear earbuds, but the minute they're out of your sight, those earbuds are going to go back in, right? So compromise. Work out a compromise that can still help keep them safe. So they can still listen to music, but they can also hear what else is going on. Now, that really works well if you can convince them to put their phone away. That when you're walking, when you're moving, your phone is in your pocket or in your bag. You can't be reading something, a text, or texting people when you're moving around because you have no peripheral vision. You can't see somebody coming before it's too late. So I play a game with the kids to show them exactly how that works. So I'll have them stand up and say, okay, when you're looking straight ahead, put your arms in front and open them up as wide as you can until you can't see them anymore. Okay, so that's your peripheral vision. You can see 180 degrees, that whole space. I said, okay, now I want you to hold your phone and bring up a text. And so they have their phone and their head goes down and they're looking, and I walk over and I take the phone out of their hand. And they're like, hey, what are you doing? I was like, I'm showing you that you didn't even see that coming. Because your vision, your awareness went from 180 degrees to this, to nothing. And usually when you take their phone away, it gets their attention really quickly.
That makes sense. Now, speaking of phones, you also mentioned a number of apps that we can apply, that we can download, or that come standard with most phones that can contribute to our kids' safety. What are some of the most important ones?
There are quite a few ways that they can use their phones. One is the emergency call button, and it's different on each phone. Sometimes it's one button, sometimes it's two. But knowing the emergency call button would be important. Knowing how to use their map app. and using it before they go somewhere, because again, they get that mental picture of where they're going and how to get there. There's one called Safe. That's one that they would have to download. And Safe is a voice-activated SOS system, and it will contact people that have been pre-selected. So you have to load numbers and names into it, but it will call those people automatically if you need them to. There's another one called Noonlight, and when you activate that, it'll send a text confirming that you need help. If you don't respond, or if you text yes, then it will silently call for help, and it'll send your GPS, your photo, and your profile information. So that's a really good one for college students, because they can put their friends in as contacts, and the friends usually know where they're going to be or where they would go and how to get a hold of them. Track My Phone, that's another one. I mean, a lot of people do that just because they lose their phones, right? Sometimes you lose your kids, so it's good to be able to find them again.
What are some other important things that we can have our teens, behaviors, habits of awareness and safety that we can teach our teens, both for while they're teenagers and also, like you said, when they go off into college and they don't check in with us every day?
That's true. Well, if they're driving, learning how to be a little bit more aware of what's going on around their cars. So again, using that scanning technique, you can look ahead, you can see if there's people around the car before you walk up to get into your car. You can use your key fob and activate a horn or an alarm before you get to the car. Like if you see somebody around there and you activate that, it's going to make them jump and they're going to look around, and they'll probably leave if it's somebody who's now brought attention to themselves. Another thing is teaching them to get in the car and lock their door. So that's another one of those habits of awareness. The habit is that you get in a car and you close the door. The habit of awareness is you get in the car, close the door, click the button, lock the door.
Make it part of that muscle memory between shutting the door and putting on the seatbelt. So
absolutely,
you're not even thinking about it.
Right.
Okay.
Close the door, click. And then if you want to read a text or make a call, you can go ahead and do that. But at least you're inside, you're safe. Nobody can just come up and open the door.
Excellent. And I think that's really important, especially with our kids who are first beginning to drive, being a little disoriented perhaps, and getting those habits in right away as part of even when we take them out driving. So they build those reflexes from the very beginning.
Right, when they're learning how to drive, just make it part of the process.
So I'm really interested in this next thing that you put on our outline here about the difference between common sense and common knowledge. I've never heard it put quite that way before, but I'm really interested to see where this goes.
A lot of people, when I tell them about what I do, or if they've taken one of my training classes, they'll be like, well, those are common sense. That's just common sense strategies. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. I think it's great if you think it's common sense, because that means you not only understand it, but understand why it's important and how it can keep you safe. So now I want you to go out and tell other people about it. Teach your children, teach your teens. And in that way, what is common sense will become common knowledge. Because part of the problem is that right now, it's not. A lot of it's not.
Hence the need for this show and for your services.
Exactly.
And on the topic of your services, you mentioned a bit what a Thinksafe seminar is, but how can somebody get access to a Thinksafe seminar? You're in Tucson, I know that, but so the lucky folks in Tucson have an in. But how do folks find out more about Thinksafe seminars?
Thinksafe Seminars is on the web, so thinksafeseminars.com, and I will list any live seminars that I have going on. I'm in the process of putting some online seminars together. I just finished up some conflict management training with the University of Arizona's OLLI program. It's training for people 50 and over. And so we did a couple of classes where we were talking about non-escalation and de-escalation. And so I'm going to be rolling out a lot more of the online seminars, because then I can reach a much wider variety of people in different places. But I'm also happy to put seminars together for organizations. So then I can tailor it to whatever the organization is and what their needs are.
So schools, businesses, PTA, scout troops, all of those groups can
get
what you have.
Nonprofits and schools, retailers, realtors, all kinds of different people. And yeah, it's great. And now that we can do this online too, via Zoom, it's terrific.
And you're available to anybody who needs it.
Absolutely.
You mentioned de-escalation techniques, communication techniques, and that's, of course, most of what we've been talking about here is how to avoid trouble before it gets near you. Our de-escalation techniques, though, those are for when the trouble's right there, but as they say, the balloon hasn't quite gotten up. So there are different communication tactics for different situations. We had an episode about using verbal judo to communicate effectively with our kids and our spouses. But what if we're in a situation where there's an aggressive person who we think is about to decide to victimize us? What are some of the best things we can do and teach our kids to do and say and change in our body language to get them to change their mind in those final moments?
Well, again, I would bring out some of those go-to responses, like stop, no, get back. And as part of the conflict management, we incorporate proxemics. So our distance, managing our distance, our angles to the other person, using our hands to help us with maybe a one-hand stop sign, a two-hand stop sign, timeout. There are different ways that you can combine your voice as a weapon and your hands to keep you more physically safe.
That's important what you're talking about there, where when a lot of us think about conflict resolution, think about de-escalation, we're thinking about a conversation that you have with an irate customer, or that you see with a police officer trying to talk some guy into not making him arrest him. Where the situations we're in, you're not really looking for a conversation. What you're describing is a short, sharp show of force that tells this person that they do not want to continue with their actions. You're not trying to talk them out of it, really. I think I even said that earlier, which was wrong. But you're trying to show them that you are not as hard a target as they thought you were 10 seconds ago, or not as easy a target. And these are some of the ways to do that. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yes, that's right. And especially for children and even teens who are naturally going to feel more uncomfortable when they're confronted by an adult, giving them these kinds of tools. They're very simple, direct, but it enables them to show confidence. And sometimes just showing confidence makes you a harder target. So if kids can have these options, they know if they're in different kinds of situations, there's different things they can do or say. That's a huge confidence boost for them. And being confident helps them move with confidence, walk with confidence. And that in itself just makes them a harder target. People who are looking for trouble usually don't want somebody who's going to put up a fight or give them.
They don't actually want trouble. They want to appear as though they like trouble, but they want the actual trouble to be very easily managed. You know, criminals, especially resource criminals, if they wanted to do something hard, they'd have a job.
That's true.
But instead, so as you say, if we can even have our kids show that they will be difficult, they'll go somewhere else.
Right. Have you ever tried to pick up a screaming toddler? Right?
Yeah, I have. And I can move a 200-pound adult whether he wants me to or not. But a screaming toddler is a whole other ball of wax.
Right.
And on that topic of confidence and on moving people who don't want to be moved, the last thing you had on here was about martial arts and how effective is it really, especially for kids. One of the things that I think that I've seen in what I would call bad martial arts instruction, of which there is a lot out there, is a teacher who convinces a 9-year-old that they can effectively win a physical fight with an adult. And in that way, martial arts doesn't particularly work. However, I think you and I both agree we are preaching to the choir a little bit that martial arts training for kids is incredibly effective and important. Could you talk about that? What are some of the reasons why we should put our kids in martial arts, even though our 9-year-old's not going to outfight an adult criminal?
The martial arts training for children is just a great all-around training as far as building their physical, mental, and emotional resiliency. Right? They learn to be more coordinated. They learn what they can do with their bodies and to get to know their bodies better. And emotionally, they're confronted with certain scary situations, but in a safe environment. So the instructor might say, somebody grabs your wrist and tries to pull you. That's really scary for a kid. But then they learn different techniques to be able to try and break that hold. So that gets back to that kind of stun and run idea. Because while we know that in martial arts training, we learn these techniques, multi-step techniques, right? When the reality is, hopefully, if you do the first part of the technique right, you won't even need the rest of it. Or you do the first part of the technique and you have to keep doing it. You know, you block them or you try to break the hold and they're not letting go. So the persistence comes in. And that's again where if they are learning different options, different ways of dealing with different situations, they're going to remember something, right? They're not going to remember that complicated technique, but they will remember something. And if they keep doing that and keep using their voice as a weapon, there's more of a likelihood that they can get away.
That makes good sense. Another example of that is in sparring practice in a school for kids. You know, it's not really a realistic fight situation. But what it is when you are about to spar, you know, two things. Number one, the person in front of you is a trained martial artist. And number two, that person's about to start to try to punch you. This is scary. And if you're twice a week, 3 times a week going in and experiencing that fear and then still maintaining your discipline, maintaining good sportsmanship, walking forward instead of running away, formulating a plan, and you can do it under that fear, you're more likely to be able to formulate a plan and execute it when you're under a more serious fear. It's just how the human brain works. Also, you mentioned it already about just that confidence makes a child a harder target, less attractive target, both for criminals and just for bullies, whether those are schoolyard bullies or criminals or even the unfortunate and rare teacher. They're going to go bother somebody who's going to put up with it.
That's true. They're just the confidence that kids get from learning, what are some targets? Like, where could I hit somebody if I wanted them to let go? Or I like to use the idea, because I volunteer to help train kids, the 7 to 14-year-olds at the school where I train. And I'll ask them sometimes, do you know what a Swiss Army knife is? And some of them do, and some of them don't. So I explain what it is. I'm like, your body is like a Swiss Army knife of self-defense, because you have all these great tools, and you can pick whichever one you need to help you with that particular problem. And there are tools that you always have with you. You don't have to get something out of your bag. You don't have to call somebody. You have these tools. You are learning how to use these tools to help keep yourself safe. And that knowledge that their own bodies are a tool, a weapon that they can use to help keep themselves safe, is hugely empowering. I know it's something I didn't know. When I was a kid, and I had some stuff happen when I was a kid, and I didn't know that I could fight back. I didn't know that I had options. And that's a big part of my motivation, especially when I'm training the kids, is that I want them to know that they absolutely can do what they need to do to take care of themselves, that they have options, that they're not going to get in trouble for defending themselves.
I think that last piece is especially important, where they might get in trouble at school, but there won't be more trouble at home, and you'll go back them up if you feel like it was a righteous situation.
Right.
So Don, before we go, you've delivered a lot of seminars over the years. You're an accomplished speaker, you're an accomplished marketer. You've been in front of a lot of people asking a lot of questions. On this topic, what is the thing that you wish you'd had more opportunities to talk about?
I think trusting your instincts. I think that's really the biggest thing that people need to understand and practice. Too many, unfortunately, women especially, but kids as well, they recognize their instinct, but they override it. And that's what typically ends up getting us in trouble, is when we override our own instinct. Because, look, our instinct is there to keep us safe. It's got one job. And when we ignore that, it's usually not good.
It's safe to say that evolution spent literally billions of years giving us the set of instincts to preserve our lives. And then each of us spends about the first 20 years of our life being socially conditioned to ignore that. But our instincts are older and smarter than those jerks we hung out with in high school.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So
and are there things that you know of to talk to our kids and our teens about how to help them overcome that early so they don't have to unlearn it in their 20s and 30s like we did?
Helping them understand when their intuition is talking to them. Like recognize those physical signs, like the hair on the back of your neck, that prickly feeling, or the stomach hurting, or the sweaty palms. Learn to recognize those physical signals, or learning to recognize that, hey, I'm scared and I don't know why. That, again, is their instinct. Just because they haven't recognized what the danger is, they're still feeling it. And once they recognize that something's going on, then all the other things that we've talked about, the go-to responses, knowing what you've been told, and if something is happening that's different from what you've told would be happening, if somebody is bullying them, and there's all these different situations, but the things that we've talked about today can help the kids know how to respond. It provides them options so that they can figure out something. Because, when these things happen, it's often when other adults are not around, teachers aren't there, the coach is looking the other way. That's when other kids or adults are going to take advantage of them, and they need to know, they need to have some tools to work with to help themselves.
And starting with that very simple paradigm shift of going from, oh, it's probably nothing, to, okay, no, really, what is it? And becoming curious about that, and not taking no answer for an answer, but continue to listen to that intuition until you figure out what's bothering you. And if you haven't figured it out in a few seconds, just leave.
Just leave. And don't worry about being rude. Don't worry about being nice. If your instinct is telling you something is wrong, leave. And we'll deal with any social consequences later, if there are any, right?
The worst case scenario of being embarrassed as compared to the worst case scenario of not acting when you were in danger.
Right.
Sometimes it's hard to convince a teenager of the reality of that, but right. But otherwise.
Well, a lot of the teens that I've worked with or talked to, they want to know how to deal with these situations. Because they find themselves in all kinds of conversations or situations that they don't really know how to deal with, how to respond to. So they are really looking for information. And if you're a parent or a friend or a teacher, if there are teenagers in your life that you can talk to, believe me, once you open that door, they are going to have all kinds of questions for you.
Excellent. Well, Dawn, thank you again for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. I'm sure our viewers appreciate all the information you've shared here. I'll put how to find out more from you in the show notes. And thank you very much.
Thank you. I've enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks for watching today. I hope you found something useful or at least entertaining. If you did love what you saw, there's a lot of ways that you can support us on Patreon, on Facebook, simply by liking or subscribing below, or by following the links you see right now to the other videos on our channel. Thank you again. We'll see you next time.